My 5-year-old grandson was very excited recently when he came third in a colouring contest at the holiday campground. Now, he's a highly intelligent child, as are everyone's grandchildren, but he's not much interested in drawing and colouring. He has more urgent things to do, and his colouring sometimes looks like that. He thought about his third place for a while, and then he said to his mother, "I guess the other two stayed inside the lines better." When he came back from holidays, he had been dictating a diary every day for his mother to write. And on the relevant day, he had written, "I coloured a picture and I stayed inside the lines!" Exclamation mark. How early we learn insider-outsider rules. Religion, and particularly the Christian tradition which forms most of our backgrounds, have for centuries been about staying in the lines. And it seems that when people have tried to colour outside the lines, there's more energy expended rubbing out the wandering lines than seeing the new picture they might create. Heresy trials, shunnings and shamings are all techniques for punishing outside the line colouring. These colouring rules are still very much alive today, and you will each have experienced your own brand of these. We only need to look at Peter Kennedy and Terry Fitzpatrick's experiences as priests at St Mary's Catholic Church in Brisbane to see what happens when people stand up for new ways in the face of the institutional rules. They and their congregation are now St Mary's in exile, separate from the Catholic communion, or at least excluded from the Catholic communion. It seems almost inevitable that insider-outsider mentalities will develop as new religions emerge as adaptations or corrections of the old ones, and most of them are. Any emerging group has to define itself how it is different, why it is separating out, and why it is right. In the last few years, some Londoners disenchanted with the traditional church formed the Sunday Assembly. They describe it as a global network of super people who want to make the most out of life, this one life that we know we have. And they seek to live better, help often, and wonder more. Now, they've borrowed the Anglican service format, but they're promoting their assembly as an atheist church, keeping the community but not God. However, already, insiders and outsiders are forming. The London community now talks more about wonder and awe than about atheism, in order to attract that wider spiritual, not religious group. But the New York group, which were evangelised from London, promote a strict atheism. They call themselves the Godless Revival and challenge the marginalisation that they see of the avowed atheists in the London Assembly. Insiders and outsiders have been the pattern of Christianity. While Jesus saw himself as a reforming voice within Judaism, there was an increasing negativity towards Jewish leaders and later to Judaism in the Gospels. By the end of the first century, the Jewish opponents are equated with the powers of darkness, and Satan is no longer the obstructor of the Hebrew Bible, but has been rebranded as leading the spiritual warfare against God. Now, since Judaism claimed a special covenant with Yahweh, Christian redefining also included the Jews breaking that covenant and its expansion to non-Jews. And so John's Gospel, that's written at the end of the first century, begins not with Jesus the Jew, but with a word logos that existed before creation. While somebody might have a new vision and start colouring outside the lines, second-generation followers may not have the same charisma or creativity, and so they construct borders that preserve the leader's vision against loss or inaccuracy. Inspiration is replaced by authorities demanding orthodoxy, and by default, heresy. Insiders and outsiders. The Greek word for heresy originally meant choice, and it was applied to all schools of thought. Early church leader Origen said, "The wisest Christian is he who has carefully studied the heresies both of Judaism and Christianity. Whoever finds fault with Christianity because of its heresies or teachings would find fault also with the teachings of Socrates. In time, heresies became the opinions themselves, and in order to settle the conflicting ideas, Bishop Irenaeus published his book Against Heresies, claiming that heretics were filled with a satanic spirit that seduced their leaders, their hearers. Once orthodoxy is officially defined by the 4th century church creeds, all other schools of thought became heresies, which is as much about power and politics than it was about theology. Emperor and church then honed in on the heretics, and the rest is history. Book burnings, exile, executions. Now, while the Reformation was seen by many as a triumph over church orthodoxy, it was also the first page of an even larger colouring book, as second-generation Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists and Catholics squared off, producing a veritable cattle yard of pens around their particular truths. Who had the truth was more than just whose t-shirt one would wear. Getting it right involved the ultimate insider-outsider classification: heaven or hell. Interestingly, life after death was not a strong idea in early religions. Shadowy ancestral spirits simply haunted the land of the living through appearances, mischief and memory. Rebirth was not even strong in the Vedic traditions, the writings of India. The Hebrew Bible talks of Sheol, a shadowy place of the dead, but not an afterlife. At the time of Jesus, however, afterlife ideas are emerging in Judaism, which is why Jesus is drawn into that discussion, and why Paul interpreted his vision of Jesus alive after death as proof to him of this afterlife. Gehenna, the constantly burning rubbish dump outside Jerusalem, became the metaphor for judgment and punishment, as opposed to a few New Testament references to heaven and paradise. But by the Middle Ages, a literal heaven and hell were graphically painted on church walls and described in church writings, and the horrors of hell were perhaps more persuasive than the glories of heaven, especially for people with a life expectancy of around 35 years. With today's longer life expectancies and scientific skepticism about possible locations of heaven and hell, the power of persuasion of such images has weakened. But it's sobering for us to think how much religious adherence has rested on fear of being insiders or outsiders in the afterlife. Insider-outsider lines can already be traced in what is called progressive or emerging Christianity today, which some of us are affiliated with. The roots of this momentum go back over many centuries, but they found firmer footholds in our postmodern, post-Christian world. People that are gathering under this label have struggled against insider-outsider mentalities in their churches, knowing what they should believe, but not able to go along with the beliefs. United more in what they reject than in what they believe, progressives see new scholarship and changes in our contemporary world as challenging the old ideas of the universe, of God, Jesus, and the Bible. Challenges that have to be investigated with honesty. But borders are now forming in this movement about how much to reject and how best to reimagine the sacred, if at all. Some are talking about mystery with a capital M or something more, acknowledging a reality behind those phrases, while others have moved beyond any God reality. Some see Jesus as being central, but a few have moved beyond Jesus to work out their own ethics by responding to life with justice and kindness. And so what started as hospitable spaces for people to escape insider-outsider mentalities, some groups have created new borders around who is radical enough, a reverse orthodoxy. Of course, this is all not unique to the Christian tradition. We've seen this mentality in Islamic terrorists, in Sunni Shia opposition, in Sufi mystical challenges to the focus of Sharia law, and we've learned about fatwas first from Salman Rushdie's satanic verses. Judaism was tolerant of different sects in Jesus' day, but the destruction of the Jerusalem temple 40 years after Jesus caused insider-outsider purges of the synagogues in order to locate any cause of divine displeasure. And we see several branches of Judaism in practice today. In Asian religions, Buddhism emerged in India as a challenge to the extremes of Hinduism, that eclectic religious traditions that have developed around the Vedic texts. And while Buddha preached a certain way of life and his Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, Theravada and Mahayana streams of Buddhism now exist, each with different emphasis and subsections. So from all this, we see that insiders and outsiders have to do with what is believed and who has it right. For many, faith is believing a set of truths and being certain about those beliefs. If push comes to shove, one is asked to assent to a creedal statement in order to be an insider. Rather like childhood gangs where best friends prick their fingers to sign their names in blood. Correct belief is augmented with divine revelation. God told us. And sometimes with ideas of election, God's chosen ones. When correct beliefs are also those of the civil state, wrong belief becomes civil disobedience. Yet, as I said in my book on doubt, faith and belief are not the same thing, and doubt is not their opposite. Faith is relational and experiential, having faith or trust in something or a commitment to something or someone, whereas beliefs are humanly constructed religious explanations of those experiences. One can actually have faith or trust in something while rejecting the accompanying belief systems. Doubt is the discrepancy between faith and belief. What happens when what is experienced by us doesn't fit in to what we are told to believe? Healthy doubt in every part of life flags inconsistencies, asking us to check our data. But labelling doubt negatively in religion, people have gone crazy, striving for certainty, when their experiences don't endorse such a conviction. I'm currently reading Caught in the Pulpit, a study out of Tufts University in the United States of clergy who are still leading congregations, many of them, who can no longer believe the teachings of their denomination or temple or in God. In each case, they are good people who went into the ministry with good intentions to help people, yet are torn apart with forbidden doubts, which in any other discipline would be avenues to richer experiences and greater knowledge. Agnostics, although they're not much fun to be around at an insider party, are often more authentic than those who are certain. Because agnostics realise that we can only have an imperfect understanding of ultimate reality and are honest enough not to endorse something about which our knowledge is necessarily limited. Can any of us claim to be any more than agnostic on this basis? As I was writing this lecture, a Facebook discussion began from something a biblical scholar, John Squire, said or wrote. Asked if he believed in the Trinity, John said he agreed with it as being helpful for understanding God from the philosophical framework of the 4th century. However, while the three entities can be found in the Bible, he didn't detect a three-in-one divine being spelled out, since biblical writers were not informed by the Neoplatonic worldview of the Church Fathers who formed the creeds. As Squires pointed out, there are numerous ways in the Bible of understanding God which aren't included in the Trinitarian doctrine, and that this fixed understanding has taken hold of much theological writing today, squeezing the life out of a wide range of other expressions about God. The stranglehold, Squire says, has limited, confined, even belittled our human grasping after God our human imaginings of who God is, and our human efforts to articulate how we might gain access to God. There's so much more to ponder, explore, and explain beyond this strict formula, he says, and we must be open to the possibilities. Now, I found this a very well-considered, open-minded comment, but the responses to Squire, mostly from his clergy colleagues, I thought were scary. Rather than address the theological issue he had raised, Squires was scolded for questioning a doctrine that he had promised to uphold in his ordination vows, for suggesting that what the historical church proclaimed was passé and stifling, and for not affirming the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed. All about insider-outsider rules rather than the question, which I think speaks volumes about how such clergy relate to their educated scientific audiences today. Are we banging our heads against a brick wall, imagining that we can create religious communities without insider-outsider mentalities that hinge on beliefs? There are mornings when I get up and evenings when I go to bed, especially when I'm struggling to write something like this, that I think it's an impossible dream. Atheists and fundamentalists have something in common. They take truth claims seriously, meaning they're serious about whether it's true or false. More liberal clergy and theologians, while not taking the Bible stories and supernatural events perhaps as literally true, speak of them as metaphorically true or symbolic stories. Biblical scholar Marcus Borg, in answer to the question, did that really happen, will say, I don't know if it happened that way or not, but I know this is an important and truthful story. Now, such a response will not suit either atheists or fundamentalists who see this as a smokescreen to cover a retreat from true or false belief. As often happens, however, in religious history, outsiders are the first to show the way. There's a huge swell today of people moving from insider-outsider religious communities to become people without borders. In an effort to avoid those sharp edges of doctrinal correctness, a new religious category has emerged: spiritual, not religious. This ever-expanding territory seems driven more by disenchantment with institutional religion than by an articulated knowledge of what is meant by spiritual. People no longer want to be identified with the scandals, the impotence, the rigidity, and the certainty of religious institutions. They find the format and content of Sunday worship, however jazzed up or dressed down, foreign to contemporary life. Yet they don't want to deny the possibility of interconnection somewhere. If asked what they meant by spiritual, many would be hard-pressed to come up with a precise description beyond what they reject. Ursula King, in her books The Search for Spirituality, says, when people separate religion and spirituality sharply from each other, or even oppose them, religion is often primarily identified with external institutional aspects, while spirituality is reduced to something internal, a personal inwardness that has little bearing on social and institutional life. I personally think spiritual is being applied today in many directions, religious and non-religious, because it's the only umbrella word we seem to have to talk about what we experience as life-enhancing and experience-making. It's become a code word for what we feel but have trouble confining in words. Of course, the word is not new to Eremos. Many of you here have discarded the language of denominational conformity to talk instead of spirituality and personal experience, of mystery not named, of meditation that removes divisions between ourselves and the sacred. And Eremos calls itself an exclusive association, inclusive association, with its roots in Christianity, offering a forum of support for individuals and communities to explore, express and deepen their spirituality within an Australian context. But does this seemingly inclusive category of spirituality, or spiritual not religious, free us from this insider-outsider thinking? The title itself, Spiritual Not Religious, already pits itself against the religious. And how can this umbrella term be so umbrella for such a vastly different lot of experiences and lifestyles? Just recently, someone from the leadership team in our very small Mudgee Uniting Church left for training at the Deep End School of Supernatural Ministries run by New Earth Tribe in Byron Bay. They expect, quote, to further build their relationship with the Father, experience greater levels of the Holy Spirit empowerment, and carry on the work of Jesus through healing rooms, chai in the park, and taking a booth at New Age festivals to promote Christian spirituality. And then they're coming back at the end of the year to help the rest of us. Now, I'm fine, but this would not be my description of Christian spirituality. And so the crucial question we have to ask ourselves is, spiritual in contrast to what? Let's look at this word, originally borrowed from Christianity, more closely. Back in 1995, I wrote an article for a feminist magazine called Spirituality, a Perpetuation of Dualism for Women, ? Of concern to me was what the word has done to women in Christian history. We can intermix the terms like soul, spirit, psyche, personhood today, but there's a great difference in meaning of those terms in the Hebrew and Greek thought that shaped Christianity. For Hebrew people, there was no dualism of soul and body. The whole person was described as a human soul, created by God from the earth, from the dust. The metaphorical imagery of the divine spirit breathed into this clay in the creation myth made living souls, not a soul and a body. In fact, there's no word in Hebrew, they tell me, for body as opposed to soul. The goal of the Hebrew life was to live fully on earth, not to prepare one's separate soul for another world. Hebrew people originally did not have a belief in an afterlife. Jesus didn't focus on the soul going to heaven, but human beings living under God's reign here on earth. We've got traces in the New Testament of the word psyche, the idea of decision-making mind or the true self, but this was not a soul-body division. Paul talks of spirit and flesh as that which is open to God and that which is open to the world. But these again are metaphors for different allegiances, not a divided person. By the end of the first century, however, Greek thought has dominated Christianity, and Greek philosophy had an explicit dualism of soul and body, spirit and matter. The indestructible soul belonging to a divine realm, but now confined in the material body. The Greek proverb says, the body is the prison house of the soul. And liberation, therefore, was releasing the immortal soul. There's also great differences in the human being between spirit, mind, and inferior bodily matter. Not surprisingly, the Greeks decided that men had 3/4 mind-spirit and 1/4 bodiliness, the superior state of mind-spirit, and women were said to have 1/4 mind-spirit and 3/4 bodiliness as their overwhelming component. In fact, the church fathers encouraged celibate religious women to starve until their periods stopped in order to become like men. Under the dominance of Greek thought, Christianity embraced that superior soul spirit in opposition to the material body and honoured the spiritual life over the corporeal, material, carnal and mortal life. An insider-outsider separation that anchored women firmly on the carnal side. Striving for the spiritual life over against the inferior bodily life, I think, is the tail that has wagged the Christian dog for almost 2,000 years, by which everything is explained. God, humanity, good, evil, male, female, spiritual, secular, heaven and hell. It infects everything. It affects everything. And it's still alive and well behind the language of the spiritual journey as opposed to the life journey. I was raised with a highly developed insider-outsider mentality that takes a lifetime to shake off. Certain beliefs put you inside the chosen few, a very fragile location where a small discretion could alter that balance. More importantly, I was divided within myself by this spiritual secular dualism, always striving for inward special experiences of God, of a spiritual life beyond the lesser bodiliness of every day. Playing in the back of the mind was, be ye in the world, but not of the world. This idea of our soul spirit striving to be somewhere else was helped by the elsewhere God. God is wholly other, in no way mixed with the world, removed to the heavens, and joined there by Jesus, the divine human go-between. Only the third member of the Trinity, the Spirit, seemed to make earthly sorties. The spiritual life, therefore, was about relating to this God up there, to an elsewhere heaven, praying to something beyond, and longing for spiritual experiences over and above our physical experiences. But we're in a whole new world now that doesn't subscribe to the medieval three-tiered universe. Heaven up there and hell beneath. Although unfortunately few seem willing to adjust our church creeds and hymns to acknowledge this fact. Science has not found a God heaven in the skies, but rather offers us theories of an ever-expanding universe that allows for theological metaphors to talk about divine energy within the universe. Any talk about something we call God today needs to be imagined, if at all, not as Michelangelo's God, Adam, fingers never quite touching in a tiered universe, but as a factor of the universe, something present in and with every physical, psychological and neurological moment of its interconnected activities. Or if you want a bigger metaphor, the universe as the divine body. How we struggle with words. Some of us are getting better at describing the sacred less arrogantly than a human writ large, or at least not over against science. And if we describe what we experience of the divine within or as the universe, this will anchor what has been called our spiritual journey fairly and squarely within our own bodies and within this world. Medicine has also not isolated an organism called the soul, but demonstrated how all the organs work together in a gloriously interconnected way to form a unified body. We need to acknowledge how deeply ingrained this soul-body cancer remains in our religious language and thought. And we need to turn it upside down to recover ourselves as whole beings embedded firmly on earth in this universe. As Norman Harble says, we are earth beings in solidarity with earth, not godlike beings who happen to be sojourners on earth. This reorientation is going to be ongoing because the zombies of outmoded, not quite dead ideas keep popping up at unexpected moments, coming back to trap us. It used to burden me when people would talk about going on spiritual retreats to think about God when I had 2 toddlers and could scarcely have time to think about anything. I felt a failure. Rather than trying to read and pray late at night, knowing I'd be up 2 or 3 more times,